and specificity. Today we are going to talk about the positive predictive values and the negative predictive values. And we are going to look at an article by CDC as well, which many news media picked it up as CDC says that the tests could be wrong half the time. So I did not see any such thing over there. Hi, Beth, how are you? Bethel, how are you? Chantel, good morning. I did not see anything over there, but that is a very well written article that CDC has published. I suspect that maybe somebody who's a contractor over there and is doing a great job has done it. CDC is normal. I have a opinion, not the highest of the opinion, about the normal CDC articles that they are publishing. I'm sorry that is how it is. So we're going to go and look at the CDC, and then we're going to understand what is the positive predictive value. The outcome of this discussion for you is going to be this. If you have a test done and there is a positive outcome of that, positive result of that, or a negative result of that, how do you assess that, how valuable that message is? And what does it mean when CDC says that as the prevalence increases, what does prevalence mean? And what does it mean when the prevalence increases? Why does a test become more valuable or less valuable in various prevalences? So that is the discussion that we are going to do. I'm very good. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for joining. And let us start our discussion. A lot to cover today and a lot of very exciting information, especially in the cases of test. I have been receiving so many comments that how do I know that the test that I did was correct or not correct? And are the tests wrong half the time and right half the time, and so on. So there is a lot in there that needs to be discussed. So let's look at it. So here is the article by CDC. And I have already put the links in the description so you can see them. The article here is using antibody tests. And I have made it a little bit bigger to go over this. So before we go over the article itself and see what they have done, let us look at this. So Shahzad Akram, do not post your spam messages again or I'll block you. All right, let's look at the data itself. So first of all, let's capture the idea. The idea is that the concept of prevalence, and prevalence is the presence of a disease in a given community slice. So here I have three slices of a community. Let's say this is one slice A. This is a small community. Let's say it is a clinic. I discussed this case yesterday. So let's say this is a clinic and there are three people who are healthcare workers. One of them is in contact with the COVID-19 patients and becomes positive. That means out of these three, 33% of the people are positive, or one is positive, and that is a prevalence. Then a few days later, another person starts developing the symptoms of COVID. Let's say dry cough or sore throat or some intermittent low-grade fevers. Let me ask you this question. There are only three people. One of the persons was in contact with COVID-19. That person developed the symptoms. That person got the test done. And when the test came back, the test was positive. A few days later, out of the other two people who were interacting with the same person, one such person, one of these three, also developed the symptoms. Tell me this. What do you think? Will this person who developed the symptom, are there greater likelihood that this person has also become COVID-19 positive, or maybe this is flu, or maybe this is allergies, or maybe this is something else? What do you think? What do you think? So absolutely. So there is a comment there that says that there is a greater likelihood. So because this community is small and the prevalence of the disease in here is more, then another person who develops similar symptoms has a higher likelihood that this may be COVID-19 as well. Again, we do not know, but from this setting, it seems that this is higher likelihood. This is exactly what we are going to talk about. What I'm mentioning here is an example, and then we will see how to mathematically look at it. Imagine if we were all a test. We are the test. And if we look at this setting here, and we see that the second person developed the symptoms, and if we predicted that that person is positive, then our value of that prediction is going to be higher because there is a greater chance for that person to be positive. Let's continue. Let's say this person gets the test and is positive as well. And a couple of days later, this person also develops symptoms. Now tell me this, without even testing, if you had to make an assessment, would you think that this person might be COVID-19 positive as well? Now the prevalence of the disease in this community of these three is 66%. So I hope that you're saying that now the third person's chances of having the disease are even greater, correct? This is what we mean by positive predictive value, that when a test comes back and says somebody is positive, we have to look at the prevalence of the disease in the society to understand if the test's prediction for positivity or test's result for positivity is really positive or not, or likelihood for the person to be positive or not. And we would look at the math as well. But I want us to develop this thought pattern before. Okay, let's continue. Let's go to another group here. Now this group, let's say, in this, the first person develops flu. Then the second person develops flu-like symptoms. Would you now think and imagine that they are not in contact with COVID-19, they are not in this setting, maybe this is 2017 when there was no COVID-19. The second person who has the disease or flu-like symptoms, if I said to you at that time in 2017, when there was no chances of SARS-CoV-2, it was not there. But let's say I traveled back from the future and I came back and I said to you, I said, maybe this person is COVID-19. I know that one, you would say, what is COVID-19? Because you haven't heard of that yet. But at the same time, you would say that, well, in this community of three, we had a person who had flu yesterday. And because it is contagious and communicable, more likely this person has flu as well. So that is again the predictive value of the assessment here. Maybe that assessment is done clinically or that assessment is done by a test. But the thinking depends upon the prevalence and the size of the community. Let's continue. Let's come here. This is the third case. Let's say here we have 10 million people. And in that 10 million people, let's say by some magic, we know that one of them is COVID-19 positive. And then another person here gets the test done and is positive. What do you think are the chances for, the test is done. Or let's start with the symptoms. Let's say this person here develops the symptoms, cold-like symptoms. What do you think? Would you suspect that this person has common cold, flu, COVID-19, allergies? Can you with certainty say this person is COVID-19 positive? And I'm hoping that you're saying, no, we cannot, because this is a very large community and there is only one person. So the prevalence is really low for COVID-19. And in that prevalence, if a person develops symptoms like cold, we may not say that that person has cold or that person has COVID-19. We don't know yet. So similarly, if this person gets the test and the test is positive, even then, this test's positive result compared to this person's positive result has very different value. The person who was in contact with a COVID-19 patient and has a positive result, you should trust that positive outcome more than a person who tested positive out of a million people when we know that there is only one more person. So you're right that this could be that these two people are next to each other and that person does become positive, but statistically, the chances of that person having COVID-19 positive and that positive test is accurate become less. So this is the concept of likelihood. This is the concept of predictive value of a test that says it is somebody is positive for something or not. How do you apply that in medical sciences? You apply it, for example, let's say that there is a doctor who is sitting in an area of outbreak, let's say New York, and he has a patient who comes back and says, I tested and I am positive. That test's predictive value is high because the prevalence of the disease in that society is high. Compare that to, let's say, another state where the prevalence of the disease is very low. If there a person says I'm positive, then we might say that, hey, the predictive value of this positive may not be high, so maybe you're not positive. And in such cases, how do we figure out what to do next? So I'll discuss that in a second. The other issue with COVID-19 and this predictive values is that we actually do not know the prevalence. And this is why a few days ago, I think Fauci made a statement that as the prevalence will go up, we will know better, the test results will continue to become better. And we can start thinking that what the heck, it's the same test. Why would it become better when the prevalence is more versus not? We'll discuss that as well, but this is the basic idea. Now with this, let's now look at some of the discussion. I really am fascinated by this very well-written CDC article. I usually am not very appreciative of the messages. You know it from my past talks, but look at this. First of all, serological assays for SARS-CoV-2 now have emergency use authorizations. This is a good and a bad thing. Good thing because we have lots of tests available. Bad thing that there are so many tests which are not rigorously tested and thoroughly reviewed, or are only reviewed from the data that is available but are not prevalent in the society. So maybe they're not that accurate yet. So newness of the test and the newness of the disease and the newness of our understanding of it has a problem when somebody says something is positive or not positive. So that's one. Second, currently there is no identified advantage of assays whether they test for IgG, IgM, and IgG or total antibody. So they're saying that I would have added a word in here, individuals. For individuals, these assays do not carry that much value as this can carry the value for epidemiologists or people who are watching the society in the bigger picture. And we'll discuss this as well. Then it is important to minimize false positive test results by choosing an assay with high specificity and by testing population in individuals with an elevated likelihood of previous exposure. What they're saying here is that if you are going to get tested, the test should be done in those areas where there are outbreaks, where there are more prevalence, where if you are suspecting that you are positive, then there is actually a reason to suspect that. But let's say you're sitting in an area where there are no positive cases or just one positive case and you're far away from that area, you may not need to, if you develop cold-like symptoms, maybe you should just get the cold-like, think that this is cold instead of becoming nervous that I have COVID-19. Antibodies most commonly become detectable 1 to 3 weeks. So we're going to talk about that. So let's now, before we continue our discussion, I want to now discuss, and we have done this in the past as well, the immunoglobulins. What are they, and what do we mean by M, D, G, E, and A, and what is the benefit of these immunoglobulin testing, and what does it mean? So ready for this one? All right, so let's do it. So there is a comment by James Kelly. So the key epidemiology takeaway by math is the higher the population, the more difficult it is to have a high certainty of predictive prevalence value. This is why tracking apps and the people testing positive discuss who they were in contact with is very useful. Absolutely correct. So let's now look at the immunoglobulins. Let's say today a person becomes exposed. Here, a person becomes exposed to SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2. We know that what would happen is that the macrophages will pick up that SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, and present it to naive T cells, right? We've discussed this many times. So this is a naive T cell. He doesn't know what he does in his life. He's just naive. Then if there is interleukin-4 present, then what happens is naive T cell will convert into T helper 2 cell, which is a helper cell. And what that would do is this helper cell would release interleukin-4 and interleukin-5, which would in turn cause B cells to become activated, correct? We've done this discussion, I think, in almost every session. B cells then will produce immunoglobulins. Now, here is the important thing to keep in mind. So Shelly says, hi doc, just left the ER for second time for shortness of breath and no pneumonia, all labs good. This doc says people are coming in with chest pain and pain everywhere. They don't know. Yeah, so Shelly, it is possible that shortness of breath can be attributed to COVID-19. That is one of the symptoms, and it can be intermittent as well. So let's have that discussion separately as well, and let's complete this discussion here. So look, immunoglobulins, the very first immunoglobulin that is released by our B cells are two simultaneously developed. Normally, one B cell would only give off one kind of immunoglobulin. But in the beginning, they give IgM and IgD. These two are produced simultaneously. IgD usually go back and get stuck on the B cells and become their receptors to catch more viruses. IgM, on the other hand, would start connecting with the virus on various parts of the virus and try to neutralize it. So this is the virus, and IgM is going to connect, let's say some of the IgMs are going to connect to the spike protein. These are the ones that are against the spike protein. Some IgMs are going to connect with, let's say, the lipid proteins. Some IgMs are going to go in and connect with the nucleocapsid protein. Remember nucleocapsid proteins? These are the proteins that are wrapping the RNA. They are around that. These are called N proteins, N peptides. So some immunoglobulins are going to connect with the N peptides and more. There are going to be immunoglobulins that are going to connect at various parts. So the takeaway here for us is that the immunoglobulin here can be of two types in their function. One, those immunoglobulins that, and they are all IgM. So structurally, they are all IgM, but functionally, they are slightly different because they're attaching to different parts of the virus. Some are just attaching at random places where virus does not bother. They are just sticking there and hanging with it, and virus says whatever, and it continues its function. Other immunoglobulins, for example, here, this immunoglobulin that is connected with the S protein, they might connect at a place on the S protein that now S protein cannot bind with the ACE2, and as a result, the virus cannot be internalized in our cell. So such protein, such immunoglobulin will be called a neutralizing immunoglobulin. That means as a result of the infection and as a result of our response to the infection, immunoglobulin response, we can produce binding immunoglobulins and neutralizing immunoglobulins. Why is this interesting to know in terms of the tests? The test that we usually get done, most of the time they are measuring and looking at the immunoglobulins that are binding. The neutralizing immunoglobulin tests, they will need to take your immunoglobulins from your blood sample and then put them on actual virus or a virus that is artificially made with the spike proteins, and then they would try to see if the antibody can neutralize that virus. So you can imagine that that is a very dangerous process, having an actual coronavirus in your lab to test somebody's blood is a very dangerous process. Due to that, such test that would check for neutralizing antibodies will be done in labs that are level BSL level 3 and level 4. But the other tests, the binding antibody tests, can be done in the labs that are BSL level 2. So I would very quickly show you this here as well. So I have put the link for this one. This is an article for, do you know the difference in laboratory biosafety levels? And they have given a detailed explanation of what is the difference between various lab safety levels. For example, level 3, which we're talking about, if you see here, people have to, standard personal protective equipment must be worn, solid front wraparound gowns should be there, scrubs should be there, all work with microbe must be performed within an appropriate BSC, access hands-free sink. And so there is a rigorous protection while testing is done. Because of that, most of the serological testing is done on binding proteins. Now, if somebody comes back to you and says, hey, you have binding proteins, that doesn't really mean that they are neutralizing as well. They may be neutralizing too. So that is one less piece of information that we know. We know that there are antibodies. Hopefully, if there are antibodies and if your symptoms have become better, then there would be neutralizing antibodies as well, but the lab test result cannot come back and say you that if they are only testing for binding proteins. Now, going back to the immunoglobulins. So now we have IgM. Usually IgM, they develop within a few days, let's say 7 days, 10 days, and then they go up and then they go down. Within a week or 2 weeks or 1 month, various levels are in response to various viruses. Then usually, this is not the case for SARS-CoV-2, usually when IgM levels go down, then the IgG levels go up. IgG are more permanent kind of protein, immunoglobulins, and permanent I mean by that is that they can be released for longer duration of time from the memory B cells that were developed. In case of SARS-CoV-1, that is 2002, 2004 timeframe infection, the immunoglobulins kept getting produced in the people's body for 2 to 3 years. Hopefully, we would also develop a similar set of immunity, but we do not know yet because we haven't spent that much time defending against this pathogen. Now, in case of SARS-CoV-2, it is interesting that IgM and IgG, they both start getting produced at the same time. Then IgM levels usually go down, but IgG level continue to persist. How long will they persist? Will they be giving us immunity, or are they just binding? Are they neutralizing or not? We do not know yet. Now, IgG and IgM, they are both protective in our tissues. IgG, I usually talk about it in this way that IgG has, so let's just stay here. IgG, if I write it, see here, it looks like a pregnant belly. And what that means is that IgG can actually pass placenta and go to the fetus as well and protect that fetus too. Then another important antibody, that is IgA. So remember this MDGA. M and D are produced first, then G, then E, and then A. IgA is important to protect our mucous membranes. Especially in case of COVID-19, this becomes important because COVID-19 is transmitted to us through the mucous membranes. So we need to have IgA present so that our wet surfaces have IgA in them, and as soon as coronavirus comes in, so let's say this is a cell, and that cell has a layer of fluids in front of it, mucus in front of it. So let's say this is that layer, mucus. In the mucus, we have lots of IgA. This IgA is important because what virus is trying to do is it is going to try to pass through this mucus into the cell and infect it. But if we have enough IgAs, then it is possible that they would, right here in the mucus, connect to a majority of the viruses and do not let them get into the cell and so protect our mucous membranes. So this is the IgG can be in the breast milk as well. So now we know that antibodies that are produced, what kind of antibodies to look for. Number one, these can be binding. Number two, these can be neutralizing. Usually the test will not give you neutralizing. They will talk about binding. Then they might report back that you have IgM, but a better report, a better test will be the one that gives you IgG levels. If they give you IgA levels too, that is great, because that would tell us that we have immunity in our mucous membranes or not. Now, because we do not know that the antibodies test that comes back and talks about the antibody present, we do not know that that antibody is binding or neutralizing. That means based on the test result of positive antibodies, we cannot say that we have become immune. Maybe we have not developed the neutralizing antibodies. More chances are that we will have. But let's just think about it this way as well, that maybe there are less neutralizing antibodies. So it doesn't mean that the test positive means that we are immune. That is one. Secondly, we do not know yet how long these antibodies will survive. If we have previous examples of our immune system's behavior, then we can speculate that anywhere from months to years, the B cell memory cells will be present in our body. They will continue to make IgG primarily and IgA that will protect our tissues and our mucous membranes. But today, because we haven't spent enough time with the virus, we cannot say that. So makes sense. Then the durability of the immunoglobulin itself. Once a B cell produces an immunoglobulin, that protein can live within us from anywhere from 2 to 3 weeks to 6 to 8 weeks. So what is exactly the durability of one immunoglobulin that is produced is not yet known. Then, are we still infectious or not? Are we still contagious or not? Again, the important answer is that if we have an IgA level present in our mucous membranes, then hopefully that means that we are protected from incoming virus, plus we are protective from shedding it as well. But it still is not clearly known. And finally, then what is the real benefit of these tests? The real benefit of these tests at the moment is epidemiology. Trying to figure out how many people are positive in a given society, in a given slice of society, to then understand what is the prevalence. And from then to understand maybe the herd immunity is developing or not developing, how much is it developing, and so on. So with this, let's now continue to understanding mathematically what is the predictive value. So look, predictive value, here we have a test. So see here down at the page, there is a test that has a sensitivity of 90%. And we talked about sensitivity and specificity yesterday. So let's say the test has sensitivity of 90% and specificity of 95%. And let us say that we are looking at a segment of society of 1,000 people. And let us say that within that prevalence is 20% of the disease that we are testing. So again, in case of COVID-19, we are not sure what is the exact prevalence. There are some studies that have come back and said 3 to 4%, 5%. Some studies have come back and said, for example, in New York, maybe 20%. We do not know yet. more testing that will be done will reveal more prevalence, but yet it is not clear. So because this number is missing or is uncertain for COVID-19, because of that, the test's results are uncertain as well. And that's what we're going to see. So let's say this disease, whatever we are talking about, let's call it disease X. For this, we know prevalence, 20%. What does that mean? That means out of 1,000 people, there are 20% that are sick. So that means this 200 is the sick people or the people that have the disease. So here is that. And then the remaining 800 are healthy, and that is this column. Now let's say we have a test, as we talked about it, the specificity and sensitivity of 90%. So 90% sensitivity means that the test will be able to take, when you do the test on somebody, 90% of the times it will be able to correctly identify a person that has the disease. So there were 200 people with the disease. Prevalence is 20%, correct? Out of them, the sensitivity of the test is 90%. So the test was able to identify correctly 180 people who were diseased. However, test could not detect or identify another 20. And that is because the test sensitivity is low. Because the specificity is 95%, out of 800, it was able to correctly identify healthy people, 95% of them, and that is 760. And it was not able to identify the remaining 5%, and they incorrectly became identified as positive. So this is the sensitivity and specificity that we talked yesterday. Now today what we are going to do is, we are going to look at this ratio and this ratio, and that would be the predictive value. And I'm going to connect it back to the discussion in a second, but let's look at the math first. What we do is, for positive predictive value, what we are saying is a test that comes back positive, what is the predictive value of that positive test, that it is really identifying the people who are positive, what is the percentage it is declaring. So what we do is, of course, we take these two numbers, we take the people who are actually have the disease and identified correctly, and then we take all those that the test declared positive and take their ratio, their percentage, and that is a positive predictive value. So for this prevalence of 20%, the positive predictive value is 180, which is the correctly identified positive people with the disease, divided by all the people with the disease that are identified by the test, they have the disease or not. And this test positive predictive value is 81%. What does that mean? That means for this community of these 1,000 people, with the prevalence of 20%, if somebody gets the test done and test says you are positive, out of 100 people, 81% will be correctly identified as positive and 19% will be identified incorrectly as positive. So this is the predictive value. This value changes with prevalence, and I would show you on the next page, we would change the prevalence and see that this value changes. Here, a low positive predictive value means that when the test comes back with positive outcome, then the trust in that test is low. 81% is not a great predictive value. On the other hand, when prevalence is low, usually the negative predictive value becomes better. And what is that? Negative predictive value is that the test was able to correctly identify how the number of people who actually were negative. So let's say here 760 were actually healthy and test was able to identify them as healthy, but it also then took 20 who were not healthy and incorrectly identified them as healthy. So how do we see? We take the fraction of the healthy to all those that are declared healthy, and that will be negative predictive value. What does that mean? When the test comes back negative, how much trust we can put in it that it is telling us a true negative. So let's look at that percentage here. So we take all that are identified as negative and are actually negative, divided by all that are negative declared, they were healthy or not. And this, in this case, the negative predictive value is 97%. What does that mean? What that means is we can trust this test when it is negative, because in that case 97% of the times it is correct. But we cannot trust this test when it is positive, because in that case 81% of the time it is positive and correct, and the other times it is positive and incorrect. So hope this much is clear. I'm going to now go back here for a second to say, look, it is the same math as we just did the exercise before. If the prevalence of a disease is more in a society, and if you see somebody with the symptoms of that disease, your assessment, even clinical assessment, would lean towards the likelihood of having the disease. On the other hand, if the disease is less in a society and somebody has symptoms of that disease, your likelihood would lean away from, not towards it that much, and you might say there may be other reasons too. That's exactly what test is doing. Let's go down here and look at, I have changed now the prevalence to 5%. So this is something that is interesting in terms of COVID. COVID, we are saying prevalence may be 2% to 5%. So let's see what happens. Same slice of society, 1,000 people, same test, sensitivity 90%, specificity 95%, but prevalence is reduced to 5%. That means out of these 1,000 people, 50 are sick and 950, the remaining, are healthy. When we apply the 90% sensitivity, out of these 50, 45 are correctly identified as positive, but 5 who were unhealthy are incorrectly identified as negative. Out of the 950 positive, the test was correctly able to identify 902 as healthy, but incorrectly identified 48 as unhealthy. Now, if we take the positive predictive value, keep an eye on it, prevalence is low. Now, look at the positive predictive value. We take all the people who are positive declared by the test, and then we take the actual people who are positive. So we take 45 who are positive, divided by all the people declared positive, in which there are people who are incorrectly declared positive. And look at the predictive value, 48%. This is what we say the test is correct half the time. It doesn't mean that the test itself is not correct all the time. The test specificity is 95%, but because the prevalence is low, the chances of the test to come back positive and be really positive as well go down. And if we look at negative predictive value, that means take all the people that are identified negative by the test and are actually negative, divide them or take their ratio from all the people who test has declared negative. They are negative or not, doesn't matter, but the test said they are negative, and then take their ratio and look at this 99%. What you would see here is with lower prevalence, the negative predictive value increases. And negative predictive value means that if the test says you are negative, then you are really negative. With the higher prevalence, positive predictive value improves. That means when the test says you're positive, then the chances of you actually being positive become higher. So nowadays, when you look at COVID-19 tests, because prevalence is low, when the test comes back and says you do not have it, that would have a higher likelihood compared to when a test comes back and says you have it, that may have a lower likelihood. And I'm going to look at one of the tests as well. Now let's continue. I'm going to take a test. This is a test here. So let me show you which test. And I have no bias here. I just went to the CDC's site and I looked at, they have a they have a site, and I put the link out there, with tests that have been approved as emergency case and what is the test's numbers. So here I took this one. This was just the very first test, so I took that. So nothing, no bias here. So this is an Abbott Alinity iSARS-CoV-2 IgG test. So that is number one. Number two, look at the target of this test. So whenever you are going to look at the tests, this is something that is going to be important. Number one, look at what antibody it is against. IgM tests are useless because IgM is going to stay in our body for a couple of weeks and then go away. There may be memory cell that can continue to produce IgM, but then that would be very less detectable. The primary immunoglobulin that stays in our body for a longer period of time is IgG. So test usually should target IgG, number one, or find IgG. Number two, what kind of protein for the virus they are testing against. So the two proteins that are usually the target are the spike protein and the nucleocapsid. Nucleocapsid has low mutations, so testing for nucleocapsid is more reliable compared to testing for spike. Although spike has low mutations as well, but it does have mutations in its non-functional parts that makes it difficult for the test to stay consistent. So target is nucleocapsid, fine. Then it says sensitivity 100%, specificity 99%. So let's look at what does that mean. So here is this test, sensitivity 100%, specificity 99%. 100% sensitivity mean that it will correctly identify people that have the disease 100% of the time. So when it comes back and it says somebody is positive, that would be 100% of the time correct. On the other hand, when it would say somebody is not positive, then that would be 99% correct. So prevalence, let's say we assume 5%, because we don't know really for COVID-19 what is the prevalence. Is that 5% or 20% or 30%? So 5% is a safe number that we all use. So 5% prevalence. Population slice, I used 1,000. It doesn't matter. It's the prevalence that is important. So now if the prevalence is 5%, patients, the slice of the community is 1,000, then there are 50 patients. So there are 50 patients. Considering that the sensitivity is 100%, that means when the test is run on them, the patients, they will all be identified correctly as people with the disease. And there will be zero incorrect negative. On the other hand, the remaining people, 950 who are positive, when the test runs on them, it will only 99% of the, I shouldn't say only 99 is a good number. 99% of the people it will identify correctly as healthy, but then it would incorrectly identify the remaining 1% of healthy people as having the disease. So with this, let's look at the PPV, positive predictive value. What is that? Here are the actual people who are sick. So we take that number, then we take this whole number, 50 plus 9, and look at the result. So the positive predictive value of this Abbott's test is 84%. How do you interpret that in your setting? Let's say you are sitting in New York, in the epicenter somewhere. Over there, the prevalence may not be 5%, it may be 20%, and then the positive predictive value would probably rise up to 96, 97%. And in that case, when somebody comes back positive, even you would suspect that they are positive because you're in the epicenter. So the test is saying positive too, so you would consider that there is a greater likelihood. But here, whatever this setting is, in this setting, when you receive the patient with a positive test, 84% of the patients would have the right positive, and then there would be 16 people out of 100 whose positive will not really mean positive. Question again is, I would like us to keep that in our mind that, okay, what do? We can't change the prevalence. We cannot go out and say, you know what, everybody gets the disease. That's not the right thing, and that should not be done. That is not the way to go. So we can't change the prevalence other than it would continue to infect people, and over time it would change. So what do we do then? In such cases, we do two tests. If somebody comes back positive, CDC says this is called orthogonal testing, where you take two separate tests with the same sensitivity and specificity and run them close enough to each other but at different times. So maybe one is done today and the one is done tomorrow or day after tomorrow. And then if they both come back positive, then the likelihood jumps to 84% or 90%. But of course, we cannot go out and say change the prevalence. So we use the orthogonal testing. This is why somebody who comes back positive and who is not in the epicenter, you may have to ask them to do one more test. Now, negative predictive value. So in the same setting, the negative predictive value is that when the test says somebody is negative, then how accurate is that test? So look at this. The healthy people that it identified as negative divided by all the people it identified as negative, is the result is 100%. So when it says to someone that, hey, you are negative, the predictive value is very high. So if somebody comes back and says this test ran and it said I am negative, then you can say, yeah, you are negative. And because the predictive value is 100% and because the sensitivity is 100%, prevalence doesn't really matter too much here. The positive predictive value would go down in the lower prevalence and become improved in higher prevalence. But because the sensitivity is 100%, it's not going to change. So this is a good test when it comes back negative. So when you look at this test and somebody is there and you're looking at the test, if you have two patients, one patient says the test ran on me and it is negative, you'll say, yeah, sure, you're negative, please go home, be fine. And the other patient says it came back positive, and you look at the positive predictive value, and that is 84%, and you say, okay, you know what, we may have to redo it one more time. So continuing, same test, one more setting. In this setting, what we have is, see, the prevalence here was 5%. Prevalence here is also 5%, but I just changed the population slice to prove to you that population size does not matter, the prevalence matters. So now we have 1 million people, same sensitivity, same specificity. Now we have, instead of 50,000 people, similar numbers here, just now in thousands. And the result, if you see here, the positive predictive value and negative predictive value are still the same. And look at this. If I go back to the site here, look at the positive predictive value. They have said positive predictive value at prevalence 5% is 84%. That is what I calculated too. Negative predictive value at prevalence 5% is 100%. That is what I calculated here as well. Now, let's change, same test, but let's change the prevalence on it. So let's say we are running this test on people maybe a few months later, and the prevalence in the community has increased. Or maybe we are running this test in a community where the epicenter is present and the prevalence is more. Now the same slice, 1,000 people, but prevalence is 30%. Sensitivity and specificity is still the same. Now we have 300 patients. And because the sensitivity is 100%, that means it would identify them all correctly as sick, and 0 will be incorrectly identified as healthy from the sick people. On the other hand, out of the healthy individuals, it is going to 99% of the time tell that they are correct and they're healthy, and 7 are the 1% that are incorrectly identified as positive. So look at the predictive value. Now we have changed the prevalence. Predictive value, positive predictive value has gone up. Remember here the prevalence was 5% and the positive predictive value is 84%. Here just changing the prevalence has now improved the number here. Total folks, individuals who had the disease, and then the individuals identified as having the disease. So this is the number of people identified as having the disease. This is the number of people who are total identified as having the disease, in which there are healthy people as well. So when you take the ratio, now the positive predictive value is 97%. Now, in this setting, if you're a clinician, you're sitting in your lab, in your clinic, two patients come in, one says the same test is run on both of them, one says negative, one says positive. In both cases, now you're almost reaching certainty level to say they both are correct. The test is the same, the prevalence is different. So here, the positive predictive value, when somebody is declared positive, now the value has gone up to 97%. That is, out of 100 people, 97 times it would be correctly telling that they are positive. And if it comes back negative for someone, then 100% of the time it is telling them that they are negative. So this is the basic discussion. I hope it makes sense. It is the mathematical way of declaring or discussing the likelihood of somebody having the disease or not. Just like we can go in an epicenter and we can say if somebody develops the symptoms here, we can clinically say they possibly have the disease. That is what mathematically is what we're seeing here. And with this, I want to just very quickly go over the CDC's site here, very nicely written. I have discussed most of these. I would like us to look at, so these are the antibodies. Remember, we talked binding antibodies and neutralizing antibodies. Then authorized serological test, I showed you the list there. Then the test performance, high prevalence setting, we just discussed. In high prevalence setting, positive predictive value improves as well. In low prevalence setting, which is the case with COVID-19, the negative predictive values are better or are more reliable. And then finally, they're saying that, okay, if you have this issue that we have now, that we can't change the prevalence, then what is your method of becoming certain that somebody has the disease or not? And how do you trust the test? So the basic three ideas they have given are, number one, choose a test with higher specificity so that even at a lower prevalence, its results are better. So choose something 99.5%. So compare that to the Abbott's here, the specificity is 99%, right? So not bad. Secondly, focus testing on persons with high pre-test susceptibility. So what does that mean? A person who is from the COVID-19 outbreak area or a person who has been in contact with the COVID-19, their likelihood of having a positive test is going to be more compared to someone who has never been in contact with such situations. And the thirdly, employ an orthogonal testing algorithm in which person who initially tests positive are tested with second test. Remember, we are talking about low prevalence, which makes the positive predictive value doubtful. Negative predictive values are usually high in low prevalence. So when somebody tests negative, you can say them with certainty that you are negative. It is when somebody tests positive that we are not certain. And this is why they're saying that if somebody tests positive here, if somebody tests positive, then do one more test. So this is the discussion. I hope it makes sense. And I hope that again, the news media picked it up and said, CDC says that the test works only half the time. Really, it's not the test. It is the prevalence in the society. Test is not at fault here. We are not looking for a better test. The test has sensitivity of 100%. What else do we want? Specificity of 99%. That is a very good test. It is just that the prevalence is low. So positive predictive value is less at this time. Negative predictive value is more. So we just have to be smart about it. Instead of saying half of the time they're wrong, that is, I think, news media is just weird. What we should do is this. We should simply say when somebody comes positive nowadays, we may have to do one more test on them, and that is called orthogonal algorithm, where two positives when they come back, and on that site, CDC has given a table that when two positives come back, then the specificity becomes or likelihood becomes very high. and you can say, yes, you may be positive. And if somebody is negative, then you do not need to repeat the test, because negative with low prevalence negative is negative predictive value is usually better. So this is where we are at. Tell me, what would you like to discuss tomorrow? And also a news that on Tuesday, we'll have a doctor who is part of our team who has been managing COVID-19 patients. So we'll have an open forum with them and discuss that what are they looking at, how are they managing, what do they think has been successful and what is not. And one more confession on my end as well. Facebook has rolled out their new interface. For last 2 days, videos have been deleted because every time I put the description links in there and hit save, it deletes it. There's a defect in their code. So today I'm not going to put any links there. Whatever is there, and I'm going to leave the video there. But everyone who had commented and who had watched at that time or shared the link, these 2 videos got deleted. So today I will not touch them, and hopefully they would stay there. So this is where we are at. Thank you very much for your time. I would just 2-3 minutes, I'll answer questions and then we'll break. Please tell me, what would you like to do tomorrow? You're very welcome. So guys, say someone can test positive for antibody but negative for antigens. So look, this is a very good question, and I should have discussed that. The antigen, the viral protein presence in our nasal areas or in our oropharyngeal area is during the active disease. It is possible that I get the disease today and I don't have any symptoms. I have not developed my immune system's response yet. It would take 7 to 10 days. If you do serological test on me, it would be negative. But if you do the antibody antigen test or RT-PCR, that would be positive. And again, within the 5 days, 1,000 particles, somebody was saying, would mean that the test can become positive. So the short answer is yes, it is possible, Guy. Secondly, when the person becomes active with their immune system, now it is possible that RT-PCR is positive, IgM is positive, and IgG is positive. As they start recovering, the RT-PCR may become negative, but I'm seeing for many patients it stays positive for a long time, may become negative, but their IgM will go down and IgG will be positive. And then after a few weeks and months, it is possible that IgG would stay, IgM will be gone, RT-PCR will be gone. We do not know yet how long IgG would stay. So good question. Sorry, I did not originally handle it. Maybe the wrong words in the description. Yeah. Keeping test kits in a proper temperature is essential. That's correct. I mean, keeping the test kit itself good is a different thing. I wanted to make sure that we can. I do not like it when the whole media said CDC says or Fauci says that it is half the time it is incorrect. It is not the test being incorrect. It is the prevalence being low. So positive predictive value being less and negative predictive value being high. So Shelly, just do an orthogonal test in that case and get one more test. You are very welcome. Does the virus get weaker over time? The virus is adapting to live in us. That would mean it would learn to become less harmful to us. That is what the weakening will mean. Are there different types of antibodies within a class? Yes, we talked about it. There is IgG, IgM. And if you're saying that are there different classes of antibodies within, let's say, IgG, then yes, there are IgGs that our body produces, and there are IgGs that monoclonal antibodies are producing. Within them, there are classes of how the IgG is constructed. There are chimeric, there are mixtures, and there are various joints in them. So yes, there are classes of IgGs. Can you discuss on complement role in COVID-19? Definitely, we can talk about that. Carol says, I had all the symptoms, yet tested negative on both tests. How could that have happened? So without knowing the sensitivity and specificity of the test, I cannot comment on it. It is possible that you have tested negative and you have the symptoms, and maybe you did not have the disease. Maybe you had common cold or you had something else. And one more from this, I remember this point as well. I recalled it, that the test can become positive and you still don't have the disease because the antibodies that we are detecting may be cross-reacting antibodies to flu. So you may have common cold or flu-like things, and the test may come back positive. So look at the link I understandably when patients are positive but are safe and actually achieve that we wanted. If yes, agreed, achieve that we wanted. If all is positive with IG, nobody needs vaccine. Absolutely correct. Sir from India, love to hear from you. My question is, once we infected by malaria, we develop an antibody against it too. So of course, every antigen we develop antibodies, but you know that in case of malaria, we can keep getting the infection again and again. So that means our antibodies and our response is not durable. Can a mother transfer antibodies to her fetus? Yes, yes, absolutely. There is placental movement of the IgG. G looks like a pregnant belly, and G goes to the fetus as well. Thank you very much, Shelly, for the $20. And from that, I remembered somebody had said that if you would like us to support you, share your PayPal. Although I have never asked for the support, but I thank you for that gesture. I have started putting the PayPal link in the descriptions as well. I did not put it in today's description. I'll update the YouTube. So if anybody wants to support my work, thank you very much. And Shelly, thank you. Super Sticker 20 years. Peer character looking at himself in the mirror saying, thanks for being you, with hearts popping out of his eyes. Thank you very much, Shelly. I really appreciate it. If IgG lasts long, does it mean I stay positive for a long time? No, 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 no. When you have IgM and IgGs and your symptoms are gone, you have become negative. Most of the time, the antibodies have taken care of the virus. So a IgG present for a longer time means you have protection for a longer time. How long, we do not know. Looking at the past SARS-CoV, we know that 2 to 3 years. We do not know yet about this one. Lorette, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Thank you very much. Tested negative on Abbott IgG and tested negative on Walgreens Abbott, but have symptoms. So again, see, Abbott, if it is 100% sensitivity, then you are tested negative. Your negative predictive value is 100%. So that means it was correct that you are negative. Now you still have symptoms. They may be cold symptoms. You may have tested negative also means that you are not immune to it. You just don't have the antibodies. That means you're open. Virus can invade any time. So it is possible that the virus can come in later. It is possible that the antibody levels have not yet come up. Let's say you are in the very early phase of the infection. In that phase, the IgM has not started. Remember, 7 to 14 days, our immune system does not start making antibodies. Now, during that time, you have symptoms. And if you have symptoms and you get tested and your immune system has not yet started making antibodies, then the test would come back, serological test would come back negative. But if you get RT-PCR, that would have a higher likelihood to come back positive. Things are opening up. What happens if COVID cases rise again? So the sad story, Tanya, there's a country where they opened up 3 or 4 days ago. And unfortunately, there is such a big rise that I get 5 to 10 calls every day. I never used to get calls from that place before to say my whole family is sick. We all have COVID. We all are sick. And now 5 to 10 families are calling every day. And people are just not getting enough treatment. The hospitals cannot take care of all of them. The beds are full. People are refused from the hospitals, and it is a mess. So societies should only open when they can manage the people who become sick, number one. And number two, when people who are going out have enough consideration to respect other and respect themselves and protect other and protect themselves. Social distancing, masks, prevention, and caring for each other. Good question. Thank you, sir. I always share. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and share. This is my standard message. All right. So I love your videos. Thank you very much. Things are opening up. We just talked about it. Vitamins. Yes, keep the vitamins and minerals up. Keep your immune system going. Keep yourself properly hydrated. Keep yourself with good nutrition. Just don't end up in the state. So John says, if IgG has a short-lived duration, does it mean the herd immunity is not achievable? So John, IgG usually goes on from months to years. IgM has a shorter duration. IgG usually goes for, as I said a couple of times before, for SARS-CoV-1, the IgGs were found in the plasma of the patient who were infected and recovered for 2 to 3 years. And I have shown that study in the past. So hopefully for SARS-CoV-2 as well, IgG is going to live longer. But because we haven't spent that time to confirm our theory, that is why it is not possible to say it would. But IgG's presence means longer term immunity. Now, what is the size of the longer term? We don't know yet. Julian says, is being suggested for helpful against COVID-19. Can you advise? I'll have to look into it. I have mentioned a link to research paper that in fact mother are transmitted the viruses to the fetus. So look, it was not observed, the vertical transmission from the mother to the child in her, the fetus. Vertical transmission was not proved yet, but I think that there was not enough studies yet as well. So Govind, if there is some article, I would look into it. Maybe it is possible. Very good. So guys, thank you very much for your time. We are way over time, but thank you and talk to you tomorrow. Please put your comments for what would you like to do. I was thinking of talking about selenium, and please remember that Tuesday we'll have Dr. Adam Johns with us as well from UK. Bye-bye.